Hi, we're live at Flying Bear Books. Just waiting for some people to roll in to get started here.
I do know a couple of years after you wrote yours,
Yep,
and I can't remember who the author was, who came out with a book about the same thing.
yep. I'm going to touch on that. I'm going to talk about that.
Okay.
Have a seat. Relax. Sit back.
Oh, I can't be in front. I'm never in front for anything.
4:26. So we got 4 minutes.
Okay.
4 minutes. We're at Flying Bear Books, downtown Newaygo. I'm guessing, is it 79 State Road? I think so. Anyway, we're down here for the old-time Newaygo people. We are next door to what used to be Biles Restaurant. So we're starting in just a few minutes. Hope some of you can come and join us. I'll have to recruit family members. I was thinking that this used to be Carl's Custom Cabinets and Electronics in this building here.
Yeah, because...
And I could find out by reaching out to Jack Hayes. Jack Hayes would know.
Yeah, but he worked down.
Yeah.
That's what I told Gail.
So, Sharon and Jack Hayes, if you're watching, if you're tuning in, we think this is the building that used to be Carl's Custom Cabinets and Electronics.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jack, you would know, because I think that was your brother Carl that owned it.
Next door to Biles.
3 minutes.
Yeah, it's like, don't give me a new store. I don't know where it's at.
I can't remember which one was McGee's, though. It was it the one closest to their building, or was the next one over?
I think it went McGee's and then Shellhannick's.
Coming this way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. It used to be the hardware store, the alleyway,
Mm-hmm.
and then McGee's, and then Shellhannick's.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or something like that. Anyway.
Reliving Newaygo history here.
Yeah. Didn't know we were historical.
Yeah.
And then there's some more right here in this nook.
Okay.
We have more in the back.
We have copies available. $15. Go outside with a sidewalk sign.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yes.
Another one you're not going to read.
So rude.
You don't know how bad? I got a huge pile I haven't read yet.
We all do. My bookshelf is filled with books, but I've only read like 12. Keep rereading the same 12.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. Once you know what you like, you know what you like.
Yeah.
how bad?
The steamboats and sailors of the Great Lakes, but not You're good.
Hey,
Got some people here for you.
that's great. Come on in.
The other ones.
That's all right. You just passed one. He'll be back.
I'm here.
And Crystal's here. You guys know each other?
I don't know.
Hi.
What?
That's Crystal Rogers when we went to school.
Oh, okay.
What year did you graduate?
2004.
Oh, 04. You were right in between her and her husband Eric. He was 2000, she was 4, you were 2. 2002.
So we have to know each other.
There you go.
Well,
Very nice hat photo.
You'll probably see some pictures you recognize.
Probably.
I should have made a sandwich sign, sidewalk sign that Taylor put around Taylor and have him go up and down the street here.
Yeah.
Facebook Live, we're going to start in just a couple minutes. Still making room for everybody. Packing them in here at Flying Bear Books. Is it 79 State Road or 76? You don't know. I think it's 79.
I think it is too. It is 79 State Road. Yep.
79.
I see those numbers every day.
You do.
All right, once Greg gets back here, we'll get started.
He's looking at books right now.
We just don't.
He just got a small section, so.
Okay. I heard he was looking for shipwrecks.
Yeah, Great Lakes.
Great Lakes. Shipwrecks in the Great Lakes. How's the parking in the back? Is it a pretty good spot out there?
We got dropped off.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. You're not
Yeah,
there.
there was some spots back
Okay.
there.
We have waters up here. 250 for flavored waters too.
That's okay. Thank you, though.
No problem.
All right, we'll get started in another minute. So Greg gets up here.
Make it even more of a mystery. That's right.
Well, come on in. We'll get started.
Okay.
This book is actually the memoirs of my dad and of his World War II experience. Someday I thought I'd write my memoirs. Mine will be less glamorous, and mine will be about my officiating experiences. As you know, I referee high school sports, so
Oh, and you're still alive.
I'm still around to talk about it. So someday I'm going to write a book about, the fans always have things they like to say to the referees. Someday I'm going to write a book that says
Can you print
everything that referees wanted to say but couldn't or shouldn't type of thing. But thank you for coming. We're going to go ahead and start. We're on Facebook Live, Flying Bear Books, 79 State Road. Come on down and join us. So to start with, my dad was in World War II. He was in what was called the Army Air Force. It was a combined service at the time. They hadn't split it up to be Army or Air Force. It was called the Army Air Force. And he rarely talked about his experience in World War II. Growing up here in Newaygo, we only heard fragments of his story. And I have a footlocker. I have my dad's World War II footlocker in my living room. And all I remember is he would just say a few things about it. this newspaper clipping that's on the screen here was in his footlocker with some scraps and not much else. So he really and rarely spoke about his experience. Now, in the summer of 1980, my younger sister and I were both visiting my parents on a summer night in August, and he opened up and shared just a little bit more about their plane crashing in Albania, about them being housed and a rescue that went on for them, and they were in this house, this large room, and there were 30 Americans. There were 13 men, enlisted men. There were 13 women. The women were all lieutenants, so they were higher grade. All the men were either staff sergeants or corporals. And then there were 4 guys that were with the plane, the pilot, the co-pilot, the radio guy, Dick Lebo out of Pennsylvania, and the crew chief, Willis Shumway, out of Phoenix, Arizona. And so that was the 30. So that's what we heard. And really, that's just about it. He didn't share hardly anything at all, and then he just didn't talk about it. And my dad passed away 2 years later. He had retired from GM. He was quite young. He was 62 years old when he passed away from bypass surgery complications. And with it, the story went with him. All right? Now, fast forward 18 years to the year 2000, roughly 1999 or 2000, growing up here in Newaygo, my Uncle George Abbott, working at the post office, had said to me one time, "You should write a story about his experience." And so that was at a time when people were talking about, like they would publish like my Pearl Harbor days in the Times Indicator. Is that Connie?
Yeah.
Hi, Connie, come on in.
I mostly just came because I can't stay long.
Oh, okay.
I want to buy the book.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Well, stay as long as you can. And so anyway, my Uncle George had said, you should write a story about his experience in World War II. People were publishing like my Pearl Harbor days in the Times Indicator and all that. So I said, okay. And I started doing some research, and that was about 1999 or 2000. Well, the internet was now here with us, and so I'm going to share, I found a lot of information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share the story and then the story within the story. So there's actually 2 stories to share. Here's how it goes. My dad was in what was called the 807th Medical Air Evacuation Squadron. And so he was a medic, and they were transporting wounded soldiers from the front lines to Catania, Sicily, where they were stationed. And so he was in the 807th, they assembled that group at Bowman Air Force Field in Kentucky. Now, in early 1943, if anybody knows their history, General Patton had come through Africa and Italy and that whole area and had cleared out the Germans and kind of paved the way for other Americans to come in, particularly for the 807th, the group that my dad was in. And so they came in into northwest Africa. Algiers was one area. And then they were stationed in Catania, Sicily. Now, let's see if I got some pictures here. So this is a modern picture on the screen. And you can see on the lower side where the red dot is, that's Catania, Sicily. And that's where they were stationed. And so they were what they were going to do was they were going to fly. They were scheduled to fly to Bari, Italy, which is on the boot of Italy. And this is just if you just look at the line there. It was about an hour. Today it's an hour, 10 minutes. Back then it was a 2-hour flight to Bari, Italy. And that was not unusual for soldiers to sometimes swap duties, if you will. And my dad had already been my dad was actually supposed to go to Algiers. He wasn't even supposed to go to Bari, Italy. He was supposed to go to Algiers. But as he says in the book, he had seen all that he wanted of Algiers, and so he did a favor as a favor to a guy. They swapped, and now my dad is on this plane going to Bari, Italy. I have a little audio clip because at one time I thought about putting the book in an audio book form, and so they gave me a sample, and I just want you to hear just a portion of this. It's like a minute long. Okay, that was even less than a minute. What happened to it?
It's still going.
Is it still going?
It says 4 minutes, 14 seconds.
Yeah, we won't play the whole thing. I just don't know why I'm not hearing it.
Oh, that restarted it.
Should have some reading going on. Okay, it's not. There must. That's really odd.
Nice
What?
music.
It's great music, isn't it? It's awesome music, and that's why I didn't make it as an audio book. All right, well, you know what? I'll just not even try to play it. It played well when I test drove it, but that's how technology goes. What he said was, Benson was down for Algiers, a guy by the last name of Benson, and my dad was supposed to, had already seen, my dad was down for Algiers. Benson wanted to go to Algiers, so they swapped, and my dad ended up going to Bari, Italy, on the plane, and my dad says, in his book, he says, I damn near swapped my life, not knowing, because what had happened was, as they were flying, if you look at as they're flying to the destination of Bari, Italy, that body of water above the Buddha, Italy, and to the right is Albania. And what had happened, that's the Adriatic Sea in between. And a storm had come through from the north, coming down, and they got pushed over, long story short, over into Albania. And they did not know that they were in Albania, because they had they were in what we call a C-53 transport plane, just a hunk of metal of a plane, and they were flying at about 12,000 feet, and they had no ceiling, there were clouds, they couldn't tell. And when everything cleared, they saw mountains. They thought that they had actually gone up to northern Italy where there were mountains, but they had actually crossed the Adriatic Sea into Albania, enemy territory. And Albania at that time was occupied by 750,000 Germans, was one of the numbers that we had come up with. So they ended up landing in Albania. Here's another look at Albania itself, and you can see where it says the crash site. What's not listed, I don't know why they didn't put that on the map, but under Albania is a capital, Tirana, and then this little town, Elbasan. That's the crash site, all right? So that's where they crashed. And they crash landed the plane, and they had no idea really where they were. But when they got out of the plane, there were people, Albanians, running toward them. Now, what happened was the Albanian people had been going through a civil war. They didn't want the Germans there, and there were 3 different political parties in Albania at the time. And so they thought that this was the beginning of an American invasion that was going to rescue Albania, but instead it was 30 Americans who were on a 2-hour flight to Bari, Italy, and this is November of 1943. And so the Americans needed help, and so there were these Albanian partisans, members of an underground, and they aided the Americans. They took them to a room in a house, and then they began, once they realized that these Americans were lost and needed to be protected and they needed to be rescued, they set out to take them to some safe places to rescue them. And so 2 men, one Albanian by the name of Hasan Gina and another man by the name of Kostik Stefik, were principal in helping them. Now, they burned as much of the plane as they possibly could. And Hasan Gina and Kostik Stefa helped them to kind of rescue them, if you will. And then my dad, during that time, was listed. This is an article from the Newaygo. There used to be a Newaygo paper here called the Newaygo Republican, and this is here it is. List Newaygo boy missing. So this is an article where they're talking about my dad missing, and so that's happening during this time. So would you like it? You gotta go.
I feel
Not a problem.
horrible. I just came in to pick up a skirt for my husband, and I said I really want to get the book because my brother's a real.
We have a book.
World War II.
They're 15.
Okay, that's fine.
We're just pausing for a moment.
I'm so sorry, you
Everybody's
guys.
sitting on the edge of their seat going, what happened? What happened?
I know, and
we couldn't write this any better. This is great.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm going to read it first because when there's local, I get really interested. But my brother is
Yeah. Let me. I signed it.
Right, yes.
Let me just date it too. Today is 11/11/22.
Yes.
Oh.
Had we participated today in our stuff up at the VSW.
All right.
11/11/11.
I'll take a hot
It's nice to see
Good
you.
to see you. Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
I'm so sorry that I can't.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
Have a good evening.
Okay, another satisfied. So let me continue on with the story here. So, the Americans had no idea that what was going on at this time was as my dad had been reported missing, and Franklin Roosevelt, the president, Dwight Eisenhower, who was the commander of all the forces, they knew what was going on. They knew pretty much what was going on, and they were beginning to put together a rescue operation. So this was the Newaygo Republican article that mentioned that my dad was missing. They didn't have a lot of detail about it, and my grandmother Abbott, she worked at that. I think it was Fremont Canning before it was Gerber, and she also was involved in a women's auxiliary for the war effort. So my grandmother was doing her part, and so on. Now, the first town they were taken to was a town called Barat, and it was in that town that the Germans literally came in. They were looking for them. They had wanted posters for these Americans, and they had literally shot up the town trying to get these Albanians to release these Americans to them. And so what they would do is whenever these Albanians would take the Americans into a town, the women would stay in one area, the men would stay in another area. And so they weren't always together. And so Barat, which was getting shot up by the Germans, they were all on the run. They were on the run. 3 nurses got separated from the other 27 people. And so the 3 nurses were kind of left on their own. They were back in Barat hidden. The other 27 Americans were on the road heading out of Barat and where they were trying to find a place where they can go, they can be safe. Now, the Germans, because they controlled the area, they controlled the main roads. So that left the hills and the back roads, the 2 tracks, mountainous area. And this is November of 1943. And if you remember, the Americans were going on a 2-hour flight, so they really weren't prepared to be out in the elements in November of 43 and December of 43 and so on. But like I said, in American headquarters had a good idea of where they were, and Gavin Duffy and Captain Lloyd Smith were 2 who were leading the charge to try to provide a rescue operation. They literally walked for 62 days. They were missing in action, and they walked over Albanians' highest mountain peaks, and this, like, again, back to this map here, this is just kind of the route that they took, beginning with the crash site in the middle, and working your way down and then back to the left until they were rescued. And so there were times that during the snow and blizzard that they could hardly even see just a few feet in front of them. Okay, they could hardly see where they were going. Agnes Jensen, she was one of the nurses, and she journaled that in her book. There were times that they could hardly see 3 steps in front of them. So the Americans were led by, like I said, Hassan Gina, an Albanian, and Kostik Stefa. And Kostik Stefa later would lose his life. The communist leader of Albania, his name was Anver Hoxha, and he had Kostik Stefa killed for providing relief and help to the Americans. Hassan Gina made it out okay. He didn't have that misfortune. But the Americans never really knew, because the Albanians were not speaking great English, so there was a communication barrier. They never really knew where they were being taken and if they could be trusted by these 2 guides. That was always a problem for them. Albania, extremely backward country back then, and they still are fairly backwards. And so anyway, they're eating a lot of goat. They're having a lot of goat milk. They're eating goats. They're drinking an alcoholic drink called raki, which is probably like a whiskey of some sort. But that's what they're doing from November 7th, 1943, until their rescue on January 9, 1944. And they didn't have really adequate clothing to stay warm and to keep. I mean, they had frostbite at times. They had fleas from where they were staying, from other animals and so on that they had encountered. And there were 3 rescue attempts during that period of time that failed. So what I want to do for just a moment, though, is I want to read a couple excerpts that my dad had, where he made comments, because my dad, we're from Newaygo, and so he never lost track, never forgot about Newaygo as he was going through this. Here in one section of the book, this was written on very early on. On November, Monday, November 8th, 1943, my dad writes this. Let's see here. He says, "I was thinking of how swift and complete had been the change that had come to us in the last few hours. Only this morning we had had breakfast, a good American Army breakfast at our own quarters in Sicily. All this couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening to a kid from Newaygo, Michigan. Home was at least 6,000 miles away, maybe more than that. It was too far for me to ever get back. Tired, so wet, and so cold." Okay, so that was one of his, as he was reflecting back. My dad grew up here and graduated from Newaygo in 1939 on the school on the hill, the old building. And then he says, here in another excerpt from the book, just reflecting again on Newaygo, this was Friday, November 12th, just 3 days later. They're going into Berat, the town that the Germans literally shot up on. Berat was divided by a river that curved out of sight behind a fold in the hills a short distance below the town. Most of the buildings were low, 1 or 2 story affairs. All seemed to be of white stone or stucco. Along the hills back from the river there were several ranges of terraces with houses built on them. Tall white spires lifted from a number of structures which we took to be churches, and there were winding white walls everywhere. It looked like a very old town, like a picture from our history books. Yet though it was strange and quite unlike anything I'd ever seen, the river, the valley, and the city brought me a quick mind's eye glimpse of the old Muskegon in Newaygo, my hometown. So there he sees kind of Berat as kind of reminding him of that. And then there's just 2 more excerpts that he's reflecting about Newaygo. This is around Thanksgiving now in 1943. Let's see if I got that right. Oh yeah, he says, one of the biggest loads we had carried was now lifted from our minds and hearts. They had got some news. The best news of all was that the word would be going out to the folks back home that we were alive and not in the hands of the Nazis. I thought of Mom, which would be my grandmother, there in our little house on the hill, up on the hill here, where the whistle of the night southbound calls loudly from the deep cut of the Muskegon and interrupts the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. Whatever news she had, she was going to get some that was good. Walt was somewhere in Egypt, and these are his brothers, my uncle. Bernard was with the tanks in Italy. Claire, or my Uncle George, the youngest of us, was in a tank battalion out in the Mojave. He didn't mention his other brother Louis, or Lewis. He was the oldest. We don't know where he was at. 4 quarters of the earth from which the news might come. But Mom isn't sitting home waiting for it. She was doing her stint in a war plant as a good soldier, as any of her boys will ever be. And then lastly, on Christmas Eve, he writes this, again thinking about Newaygo. And by the way, in the book, he's called Little Orville. My dad was 5'7", 5'6" or 5'7", and his middle name was Orville. And so a lot of the people called him Little Orville or Orville. So he says, someone ought to offer a prayer tonight. won't make the child go any further, will it? Another question. No, but it's Christmas Eve, and it isn't going to do us any harm. We'll have to do something for Christmas. Maybe you got something there. Come on, Orville. You're the ranking non-com. I looked around the table at their faces, trying to make sure this wasn't a rib they were putting me on. No grins were being hidden. They were simply waiting for me. I stepped back to see the light, taking from my pocket a little prayer book that was with me, and that will always be with me. And they had these little prayer books back then that they would keep in their pockets. They fit. They were surrounded by metal, and they would stop a certain kind of bullet as well. But here he's reading. He says, "Bless us, O Lord," I read, and these thy gifts which we're about to receive from your bounty, and be thou and you be the eternal food for our souls through Christ our Lord. Amen. We all sat down and began to eat. The food was fair, but again there wasn't enough. When we had cleaned up everything in sight, we were still hungry. Jim Cruz, one of the men, he's the guy on the front cover in the bed, pushed his bowl back and rested his arms on the table. "Read us some more from that book, Reverend," he said, and smiled, but there was no derision in his eyes. I know that many of the boys were carrying prayer books, and some of them kept up with their prayers night and morning, and that the other boys who didn't have books also prayed. So much of the time these last few days there would seem nothing left for us to do but to keep on praying that somehow we'd make it and get back to our lines. Once more I took out my book. "We give thee thanks, O Almighty God, for all your benefits, who lives and reigns now forever. Amen. May the souls of the faithful departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen. Visit, we beg you, Lord, this place, and drive it far from it all, from us, from the snares of the enemy. May your holy angels dwell here to keep us in peace, and may your blessing be on us always. Amen." So those are kind of the feelings and the emotions that they're thinking as they're in Albania at Christmas time. And they were finally rescued on January 9th, 1944, just after midnight. And so when they were rescued, they were sworn to secrecy. Many of them arrived. Here's some pictures. This is them getting in Bari, Italy. So they come back across the Adriatic Sea, and they're being helped up off the boat that they're in. This is Bari, Italy. Here are some of the nurses, not all of them. The lady in the middle in the back, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She's the third one from the left, going right. That's Agnes Jensen. You'll hear more about her. She was from Morley Stanwood. Okay. In fact, that Grand Rapids Press article that I had on the showed you guys earlier. My dad was from Newaygo and she was from Morley. They were the two only from West Michigan. So that's Agnes Jensen. And here are all the guys, most of the guys. My dad, probably easier if I just come around and point rather than try to figure out how many people over it. But my dad is right here. That's my dad. And this guy here is Jim Cruz, and you'll hear a little bit about in a minute. And this is the winged boot. And so because they had walked back, they qualified. They had a club called the Late Arrival Club, and only those in the Late Arrival Club got this winged boot. In fact, I'm wearing it right now. That's my dad's original pin right there that you see here that he got. And here he's with a friend. That's Bob Bowman from Tennessee, and they're in Florida right now. And they had just got the boot. My dad's wearing his. And they were sworn to secrecy. They were never to talk about the experience. They could not. They really had mum was the word type of thing. Later, the three nurses that were separated from them were rescued on another. There was another rescue attempt in March, so like 2 months later of 44, and they rescued the nurses on that attempt. So that was my dad's story that he never really spoke about. Came back to Newaygo, raised a family, and we lived up on top of the hill here. If you know where the Little Caesars Pizza place is, there's a fence and there's a house on the other side of it. That's the house my dad built. He built that in, I think, 1949, and that's where I grew up. That's where we raised our family. So, like I said, I bumped into my Uncle George 18 years after my dad passed away in the year 2000 at the post office, and he said, you should write a story. So I started doing some internet research, and as I was doing some research, I found this called The Albanian Escape. And we're doing, so my wife and I were doing this together, and we're researching, and we're looking on the computer screen on Amazon, and here's this book, The Albanian Escape. I go, Agnes Jensen Mangrich is the author. And I thought, where have I seen that name before? And I pulled out one of my newspaper clipping, and there she is, to the left, my dad on the right, that's her, Agnes Jensen from Morley. And so, there was a great spot, and so I bought the book and read it and just devoured it. I also found out that back in 1947, True Comic Books actually had this story in there. There's this, and so I bought this on eBay, and here is True Comics. It's 1947, and here is the story. They called it the Balkan Escape because that area of Albania, Yugoslavia, that area there across the Adriatic Sea from Italy was called the Balkans at that time. And so I was really blessed with the ability to travel back then. I was just kind of going all over the place. I did have Agnes Jensen come to Michigan, and I met her. In fact, I'm just going to scroll through some pictures here. This is Agnes, and here we're at, this is about 2001. We're over here at the River Stop Cafe, and she's got her book doing what I'm doing tonight, and she's doing book signings. And then here is Agnes again. She's the lady in the middle. That's me in the back, and my sister in the back right. And the other older lady in the front left is Elna Schwant-Crum. She was one of the lieutenants also on that. She's from Hopkins, Michigan. And then I traveled to Oregon, really to see some friends, and then I found out that Harold Hayes was there, and Harold Hayes was in the group. He was a good friend of my dad. He was one of the sergeants in the group, and here he's showing me a map. We're at his home in Oregon, and we're looking, and he's showing me kind of the route that I showed you guys on the screen earlier. This is me on the far left, and my sister Holly on the far right, and then the couple in the middle is Jim and Kay Cruz. Jim Cruz is the guy that was in the hospital bed, the guy in the picture, middle of the book. And I remember when I called them to let them know that my wife and I and my sister and brother-in-law were coming out to the East Coast to do a vacation. They were in Brockton, Massachusetts, which is next to Boston, outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And so I said, hi, my name is Clint Abbott. My dad is Larry Abbott. And immediately, this guy, Larry Abbott, he's got this Massachusetts Irish brogue, if you will. Larry Abbott, what a great guy, Larry. God love him. And that was one of the things that Jim Cruz was known for. He always said, God love him. You see it in the book. I heard it on the phone. He goes, God love him. If Larry Abbott isn't in heaven, then what the hell chance has a guy like myself got? You know, that's what he said to me on the phone. So he had a lot of personality. And so there at him and his wife, Kay, so we had a great time to visit them and kind of hear more about the story. I happened to be in Phoenix at a conference one time, and I heard that Willis Shumway, this guy was the crew chief on the plane, so he was in charge of the mechanicals of the plane. I had heard that he was in a veterans facility in downtown Phoenix. And so I had a break from my conference. I got in the rental car, and I drove into downtown Phoenix because we were outside in the suburbs. I drove into downtown Phoenix and met Willis Shumway there. So I had an opportunity to travel and to meet as I'm kind of doing this research. And then, of course, I bump into Uncle George in the post office again, and he's asking me how it's going. And I said, well, I've met a lot of people, and there was a book written, and I'm doing some research, but, don't know really what else I could come up with. He said, well, you know he wrote a book. No, I didn't know he wrote a book. So I went home and talked to my mom. Remember, my dad never talked about the war, and I said to my mom, Mom, did you know that Dad wrote a book about this? No, she didn't know about it either. So we start looking and researching and trying to figure this out, and I found out that he had collaborated here in Newaygo with a guy that was a part-time writer for the then Newaygo Republican newspaper and a part-time mail carrier, Allen Field Smith. And I didn't. And that guy's long gone because he was much older than my dad, and so I didn't know how to get a hold of him. Well, your mother, my Aunt Garnet Abbott, my Uncle George's wife, she was involved in the Newaygo Alumni Association. She got me some contact information, so I called this lady, Marcia Field Smith, and I explained who I am and about my dad, and she says, that was back when your dad just got out of the war in the fall of 45. She said, I was in high school at the time, and I remember him coming over and working with my dad. She says, my husband and I have a home in Houston, Texas, and we go there during the winter, and I have boxes of my father's things because he was a writer. So she says, I'll look, and if I see anything, I'll let you know. So a few months passed, never heard anything, and so I was trying to figure out, okay, what else can I do with this story? And then she calls me, and she says, you probably thought I forgot about you, but I'm here in my home in Houston. I've gone through my father's boxes of my father's things, and I have found the typewritten manuscript that never got published. And then she says, and I have your dad's handwritten notes, and I want you to have all of it. And so she came up to Newaygo in the summer. There again, we met at the river stop, and of course, whenever you do these things, you got to publicize it, right? So it was in the newspaper, and that's me in the picture. That's me and Marcia, and she's handing me, and that's the manuscript, handwritten notes on the far right. And so she's giving those to me here at the River Stop Cafe. It's always been a place for us to kind of center, if you will. And so I took that, and I took the typewritten manuscript. I made some copies for my mom and my sisters, the two sisters, and then just kind of, we read it, and it was great story. And it just sat in my home office. I was living at the time in Caledonia, I'm in ministry, and I was pastoring down there. And then on Veterans Day of 2009, so 13 years ago today, I was sitting there. I had some downtime. Like I said, I pastor, I referee, and my volleyball season had just finished, and I was waiting for basketball season, just like I am now. And so I had some downtime, and I looked at that manuscript, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to finish what he started. And so I took it, and I put it all in the computer, and then I contacted some writers, like with the Zondervan Corporation, which was it's no longer around now, but it was a Christian book publishing. They got bought out by another conglomerate. But anyway, there was a couple guys that were willing to, for a stipend, help me edit it. And so they did that, and I had a couple friends also helping me. And so we edited it, and we published it, and we released it in 2010. And we did it, the release, in a couple of areas. First, we just did it to family and friends in about February or March of 2010. And then I did a press release, and of course here's there's the manuscript, the handwritten notes, the typewritten manuscript, and then the finished product, or the paperback version, and then there's a hard copy version, which, quite frankly, is not as good a product as this paperback version is. For some reason, it just doesn't look great in hard copy. I don't know why. But I did a press release. We did it to family and friends, and then coming up on Memorial Day, I had put out a press release, and the Times Indicator, and I was living down in Caledonia, and they ran something, and the Muskegon Chronicle ran a little thing. But the Grand Rapids Press got all over that, because they remembered that newspaper article that was in their files from 1944. And they saw this as a continuation. And so they sent a writer and a photographer to my house, and they had me get all of my war paraphernalia, the Foot Locker and all that kind of stuff, took my picture and interviewed me and did a great article. And I knew it was coming out on Memorial Day weekend. But I had friends from Newaygo calling me in Caledonia, dude, you need to look at, you got great publicity for your book. You're in the Grand Rapids Press front page above the fold, and there it is. That's I have this mounted on a wall in my office at home, so I apologize for the quality, but you can see they really did. We have the full front page there in memorandum, a rescue tale of eluding the enemy, and so that's been really cool. Since it's a release, I've had people come to me. I've had authors come to me and express interest. Kate Lineberry, she was a freelance writer for the New York Times. she contacted me. She bought the book. She saw it on Amazon. She bought it. She read it. She fell in love with it. She was looking for a story to write. She was going to put her spin on it, and she wanted permission to use our book as source material. So we did that, and she published her book, which came out in 2012 or 2013, called The Secret Rescue. And then, right at the same time, I got a call by a guy by the name of Jim Gay, a writer out of Virginia, who was, there again, bought our book, saw it, was going to write something on it. So he calls me, and he wanted to title his book using a phrase. So we gave him permission. I'm not even sure he needed permission, but he wanted to use a phrase that my dad had used in our book. My dad had said, as they were traveling on the mountains in Albania in the winter where they could hardly see each other in front of them, my dad says, it took a savage will for us to get through this time. And he wanted to call his book Savage Will. And he did. And he published about the same time that Kate Lineberry published her book. And so there's a book now called The Secret Rescue by Kate Lineberry, a spin-off book called Savage Will by Jim Gay. I also got email from an American Albanian from Boston by the name of Peter Lucas. Peter Lucas was a retired writer for the Boston Globe. Peter Lucas was well familiar with the story because Agnes Jensen, the nurse from Morley who wrote her book that my wife and I found, well, when he was going to help her write that, but they bumped heads on probably some project things and they couldn't make it work out. But he had been giving people tours over to Albania and visiting the crash site, even though the Americans back then had burned most of the plane. There were some parts still to be found. In fact, right now I know that there's a family in Albania that has part of the wing. It has the eagle that's on the wing of the plane. It's part of their ceiling in their house. And another guy has the cockpit seats in his living room, type of thing. So Peter Lucas, he wrote to me and he just said to me that our book was really, really well done, and he thought it'd be great to have a movie made of that. Well, during the same era, this is like 2010 going to 2011, I got contacted by a couple from Australia who had got the book. The husband, did documentaries. And she was in the States because she did some legal work for the United Nations. And so they talked to me, they extended me a contract to make it a movie. And so there was a lot of legal stuff there, and I talked to some friends and even Matt Shepard here in town on the legal side to see, hey, does this look okay type thing, and they assured me it looked pretty good, and because there was like royalty stuff and fees and all that. But too bad the couple they couldn't swing it. They couldn't get the funding needed to make that film happen. Well, that was quite a few years ago, so I'm no longer under contract. So if anybody wants to do a contract with us, that would be great, type of thing. So those things have happened, and I've met quite a few Albanian Americans who love the story. In fact, in 2012, I got a call about there's a large Albanian population in the Detroit area, and I don't remember the name, but they wanted to interview me. They're doing a documentary, and so I don't remember the date, but it was in 2012. It was in December. Albanian TV van pulled into my driveway, and in my family room where they interviewed me, and they did a documentary on it. And so it's just got a lot of positive stuff, and it continues. Now, in 2013, Little Brown Publishing, which published Kate Lineberry's version of the book, they were honoring that group in November of 2013. It was the 70th anniversary of the crash and then later rescue, and they were honoring that group in Washington, D.C. And so my wife couldn't make it, but my sister and I, my brother-in-law, and your sister stepped in my wife's place and went to D.C. with us, and there the group was honored on that evening, and it was really special. We had Harold Hayes. He was the last living, by 2013, he was the last living one of the group, and he was in his 90s, and here we are in D.C., and I am, so back row, left to right, I'm the second one. That's me, and then my sister Holly is right next to me. The guy in the back, tall guy in the back, that's Agnes Jensen's son, John. His wife, Karen, in the red, and I don't remember the other three's names. And then that's Harold Hayes sitting there in the front. And so the group was honored that night, and it was really, really quite special. But I'll tell you, the real special thing was, if you remember, as I was telling you, November 1943, when the plane crashed, two Albanians met them. Kostik Stefa, who didn't speak hardly any English, and Hassan Gina, who had some broken English. Well, they're long gone, but Hassan Gina's son, Akil, was there with his sister Danica. And so there we are. And you talk about just a moment in time. Who would have thought that these two Americans that are in November at a crash in Albania, that those two, their sons would meet each other and embrace each other in Washington, D.C. 70 years later, thinking about that moment in Albania. And then, so that's me and Hassan Gina, Akil. And then this is, on the far right is me, Akil. That's Akil's sister. To his left, Donica, and that's my sister Holly. So there we are, the son and daughter of Lawrence Abbott, son and daughter of Hassan Gina. And that right there just blew me away, and it was really, 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 really special. So what I did was I edited the book in 2013. When we got back from D.C., I got pictures, and I added one more chapter, and I called it the final chapter. So if you bought a book in 2010, you need to get you need to get another copy, so it has the final chapter written on it. It's called the final chapter, and it's just what I told you about the D.C. experience and about these and all the people that attended there. And so that was called the final chapter. So today it still receives wonderful reviews. I just have a lot of different interests. I pastor a church. I used to teach high school. In fact, there are times I did both at the same time. I kind of into history. I have a social studies minor. Not really a historian, but there are things about history that interest me, and particularly this period. I also do some family history stuff. Well, okay, and I enjoy economics. Not too many people enjoy economics. I had a friend of mine say, economics, when I see that word, I yawn, But I love to teach particularly free market. I taught free market economics for 5 years in a high school. And so why do I say that? Is I went to a conference by Acton Institute in Grand Rapids. And I did that as professional development recently. In 2019, I was at their conference. I just enjoy keeping abreast, even though I'm not teaching anymore, but I'm pastoring. I still like keeping up on what's going on in the world of economics. And so I'm at this conference, and a colleague of mine said that there was a young Albanian young lady there who was interning. Well, I thought, that's cool. Maybe we'll bump into each other. Well, in Acton, they are a think tank in Grand Rapids where they teach virtuous living and free market economics. And so all sorts of international people come to these things from all over the world. And there's about 1,000 people. I was down at DeVos Hall. And so I was there in the summer of 2019. And I'm in this ballroom Friday. It's the last day of the conference. It's in the early afternoon. And I don't even remember who the speaker was. I was going to listen to her what the topic was. But I'm sitting in the back getting my iPad set up and getting ready to take notes and really enjoy this last session. And I see some people up on the front. And, of course, the interns there help the speakers get their microphones out, get handouts for the people that are going to be sitting in the session and so on. And this young lady is talking to the speaker, and I hear something about Albania. So I go, oh. So I go all the way up to the front. They're just still getting ready. There's hardly anybody in this ballroom. And they're talking, and I'm just kind of standing listening. And she's talking, and she's getting her information, what the speaker needs. And then there's like a pause, and then they see me, so they turn. And so I just, apologize, didn't mean to interrupt, but I started talking to her. I said, I understand you're from Albania. And yes, and her name is Alkita. And so I met her, and I'm talking, and I'm explaining about my interest in Albania, a little bit about my dad's story. Immediately, she swung, and I had her full attention. And now, I'm explaining a little bit, and so it's like she forgot about the speaker that she was supposed to be helping, and she's listening to my story. So she said to me, I'm going to be, because this was the last day of the conference, so she says, I'm going to be in the United States still next week. I would like to get together with you and hear more about this. So her and I met at Grand Valley's downtown campus, kind of like the Starbucks. And in fact, here we are. That's me and Alkita. And I brought her a copy of the book, signed it. And she just took a lot of interest in the story, and we have become friends. And like I said, I've become, actually on Facebook, I have a lot of friends that are Albanian Americans. In fact, Kostik Stefa, the guy that lost his life, his daughter, I'm friends with her on Facebook, but she doesn't speak any English, so we always have to do this Google Translate. I don't know if the Google Translates always really well, I'm not sure. But anyway, Alkita, we are in connect. I still have good connection with her, and she took a lot of interest in the story. In fact, she took so much interest in the story, she was supposed to write because she was an intern. Acton brought her to Grand Rapids from Trojana, Albania. She lives in the city right near the crash site. So they brought her at their expense to be an intern, and so the interns were supposed to write a story for their journal, for the Acton Journal, about what their experience was like at Acton University. Guess what? My family story trumped anything she did at Acton, and we made their journal. And she did that, and here's her story. Acton Institute, get my reading glasses here, Power Blog, and this is by Alkita, the amazing story of how Albanians helped American GIs escape to freedom, and that made their publication, their journal, over anything that she was doing actually at the Institute. And so that was really cool, and she was telling me a little bit about that. Well, we have stayed in touch, and so like the story continues even today to be alive. That was 3 years ago, but this past spring, Alkita messaged me, and she let me know that they have an interest. She's with a group right now. They formed a group that is interested in the story because Albanians are known for, they're again a virtuous society, they're known for their hospitality, and they want to focus on that, and they have, I don't know what the anniversary date is of their country, but it's coming up maybe next year, and so they really want to highlight this story, okay, talking and as promoting how hospitable the Albanian people have a history of being. And they want to translate the book into Albanian. And so we have the rights, all the copyrights to it, so they have to get permission. So they're working with me on that, and I'm kind of waiting to hear how that's going with her. And then they want to do a conference, and she has said that we would like to have you come and speak, kind of like I'm doing right now, kind of speak, and we'll pay your expenses and so on. So, I don't, for me to go to Albania, I'm not really interested in like walking around to see the crash site and plane parts and all that. But if it's about talking about a virtuous society and hospitality and people helping one another and what they did for my dad and the group, type of thing is amazing, and I would go there in a heartbeat. So there you go. There's the story, and with some pictures, and how are we doing on time? Oh my gosh, 5 minutes. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions about anything about the story, the book, or anything?
I found it pretty interesting that the 3 nurses there were so much longer.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about being savage and really waiting it out. Was any more of their story ever told?
Not too much. A little bit about, one of the things I didn't mention that I forgot to mention was there have been other books, there was a few other books written as I was doing the research, but they never talked about this part of the story. They did talk about the nurses. Nurses, women, were not supposed to be behind enemy lines. And so this was like a huge thing, and that's why it attracted so many stories and so much interest. So the 3 women were left back at Berat when the town was getting shot up. They never left. So just imagine people hunkering down in basements, like in a tornado drill or something. But the Germans are coming, so all the Americans are leaving town. But they remained and stayed put, and they were safe in Berat. And after the Germans had left Berat, then they came out with their guides. I don't know the story about if they were ever able to connect or not, but they did end up getting rescued, like I said, in March, just a couple months later. But what that must have been like for them to be there. Oh no, everybody's rescued and we're still here, type of thing. So I don't know all the details on that, but that's kind of how that happened. Yeah. Any other questions? There's my granddaughter, my patriotic granddaughter. All right, well, hey, thank you for letting me come. Thanks, Eric and Crystal, for letting me come tonight. Thanks for joining us. If you joined us on Facebook Live.
So are we going to keep some copies of the book here at the store?
Yep. We can talk about that in just a minute. So that sounds great. We'd love to have copies here. We'd love to have people buy this. Yeah. Okay, let me go ahead and turn off Facebook Live. Thank you so much for joining us. Finish.